So this is your cantaloupe and watermelon patch.
Yeah, a nice little row of sunflowers. Now, I'm hoping to convince the guys that a little bit, once the stuff under the tarps have died back a little more, we can come in and put some low-growing cover crops down. I don't like all this plastic.
Well, you need your earthworm leachate soil drench down here about every 2 weeks on those plants.
See, we're not going to get that pulled off this year. We should just use humates because we don't have enough worms.
Yeah, if you've got humates, then do it with humates. With your humates, make sure to put some borax in them or solubor.
And so what
I'm not sure the borax would be enough.
We have solubor.
I figure that if you used anywhere from 100 to 200 grams to the acre's worth of watering solution, that's probably enough. Because if you're doing it every fortnight, then you're going to need to do that much.
So it's going to be really
but
hot
if,
months here. Yeah.
well,
Compost tea with humates?
figure that 100 grams is about 3 ounces. Or 200 grams would be about 6 ounces. It's not a whole lot of solubor, but it's enough that with the humic acids that it'll bind with the humic acids and then it'll slow feed to the plant. Because if it's just in the water by itself, then the plant's liable to get too much. But I'm looking at these cantaloupes and some of the bug damage, and they're not like bursting at the tips, just trying to grow like, in every direction. So I got to.
They went out late. They were stunted.
Yeah, well, stink bugs will get the stems and various things. It's just they shouldn't be so attractive. What Phil Callahan's research showed is that too much loose nitrogen, nitrates and urea, either one, if it gets, if it gets into the plant, then at night the plant becomes a beacon for the insects.
Let's look at the soil test. This is number.
Yep. Okay.
This is Mr. Ed.
Mr. Ed is the one on top. Okay, and Mr. Ed, the total exchange capacity was 11.54, nearly 12.
It's pretty good for outdoors.
Yeah, pH 6.5. Phosphorus was 60. That's adequate. If you got everything else working, it would just automatically be a little higher because you got plenty of phosphorus over here. So looking at nitrate, it's 21. That's a little high. See, it's gone to the high end there. And your ammonium, which is what produces fruit, because nitrate produces foliage and root, but the ammonium is what produces fruit, and that's only 3.2 parts per million.
So what we want to do is get the humates in and get the life going.
Yeah, calcium and magnesium are looking okay. Potassium looks like it's lagging, but over here, if you have biology working in your soil, you've got plenty of potassium to release.
You recommend the EM over the compost tea?
I would recommend the EM over. They're two different things.
So maybe
and you can make
compost tea 1 week and EM the next.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. With your compost teas, you can make a fungal brew, you can make a nitrogen fixing brew. It all depends on what you feed it. So if you want a nitrogen fixing brew, then feed it soy flour.
Soy. Oh, that's interesting.
Oh man, by the time you finish
like
brewing, it'll knock you over with the ammonia coming off the tank.
Really?
All right.
Yeah.
And EM, do you just brew it to their standards, that amount of molasses, that amount of EM, or do you have other things?
My preference was 1 part in 20.
1 part in 20.
to water. So if you were doing it,
but no molasses or juice.
Molasses. I am doing 5-gallon jugs, and so it's a quart, because that's a 20th of 5 gallons. A quart of mother culture and a quart of molasses.
And then do you brew your own mother culture, or do you just keep buying?
No, I've been buying mother culture. To brew mother culture, though, you need to get your electrical conductivity up there around 15, which is real high. So you need to add some kind of salt. And I would prefer to add a full spectrum, like fully evaporated sea salt, rather than just table salt. Because then you've got every trace. And the EM has this way of, like, you need nitrate reductase enzyme. You always need it. Because things will oxidize to the nitrate, and you've got to pull them back. And the plant can do this, but it takes molybdenum, and it has to have the right enzyme. Cobalt, it'll make B12, and that's so important for your protozoal activity. But if you were to put cobalt sulfate on the soil, then it has to be turned into, by the biology of the soil, has to be turned into cyanocobalamin. We found in Australia that we could put 40 grams to the hectare of cyanocobalamin, buy it as a nutritional supplement for animals. And it's a bit pricey, but 40 grams to the hectare, that's 2.5 acres. That was pretty affordable.
Yeah, a couple ounces, right?
Yeah, because it's in the right form. And the EM will put it in the right forms before you ever apply it. So you'll end up with nitrate reductase enzyme and nitrogenase enzyme and vitamin B12, and all of those things will be in your EM.
So if we're low on ammonium, if we do the soy flour, that'll help with that? The soy flour tea?
You brew your compost tea using soy flour.
Food,
Yeah, it's approximately 4.5 pounds to the big cube. Not 50.
Big cube.
The big cube, the, like, what's that, 275 gallons, something like that?
Right.
It's,
For a tote. Yeah.
yeah, for a
We're
tote.
brewing about 110,
110,
gallons,
120. Yeah.
Yeah, so it'd be about a pound and a half or something.
You can wind it back, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
So
It's
that's,
exciting. I'm looking forward to trying that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a new one. I like the way that sounds.
Yeah.
Soy flour makes sense.
it's got everything it takes to fix nitrogen in it. It has the molybdenum. It has, every element, every factor is in soy flour. They nodulate. They make beautiful nitrogen-fixing plants. And incidentally, many of your rhizobia, like Rhizobium japonicum that nodulates on soybeans, it lives free in the soil and it lives free in that solution.
Cool.
So you'll end up with the rhizobia doing the nitrogen fixing.
That's what we want, absolutely. These guys are looking a lot better because they didn't get put out late. They got put out at the right time.
Yeah, weather wasn't all too helpful
We had
with
very
that.
uncooperative weather this
Yeah,
year.
yeah.
It's been
we
tough. Last year was pretty
Well-
tough too.
Well, look at it this way. If there is global warming, and there is plenty of evidence,
yeah.
despite
Yeah, right.
the beliefs or lack of
Right, yeah.
beliefs or whatever of some certain people, then there's a lot more evaporation off of our equatorial oceans.
A lot more water in the air.
There's billions more gallons of water evaporate
Yep. Yeah.
by just a 0.5 degree rise in temperature in our equatorial oceans.
Right. And we're looking to get to 2 degrees.
That
by
has to
2050,
fall
yeah.
somewhere.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's global warming does not mean it's going to all dry up and become a desert. Not at all.
No, you'll have
It
those.
means
Weather
that we will
extremes.
have more droughts and floods.
Yep.
Yeah, basically my joke these days is, well, I had my annual 100-year flood.
Yeah.
My weekly 100-year flood, the 500-year
It
flood.
could get like that.
Well, I said that to
Get a
somebody.
lot
They said
more
I had my
extremes.
my annual 500-year flood.
Oh yeah, that's bad.
I mean, there's a guy who's got a place called the Veterans Healing Farm. Lived on the property 13 years, never had a flood. Since last May, it's flooded 5 times.
Well, No, it's.
Something's going on.
Oh, well, how could you doubt it? I just don't. I don't get it. People
They
that.
doubt it because they don't want to deal with the fact that there's a commons and they're responsible for it. That's why they doubt it. They're ideologically.
Well,
climate change doesn't exist because
yeah.
they're ideologically opposed to it.
it's like what we were
Capitalistically opposed.
talking about
That's their
earlier
ideology, yeah.
with the asbestos, denying it until it's too late, or cigarette
It's too
causing
late
harm,
already.
or
It's too
well,
late
until
already.
they get sued and they have to, or until they go bankrupt.
It's too late, but we sure got to keep trying. That's
Well,
what I was saying.
we do, or it's going to end up being a lot worse
Yeah.
if we don't.
Yeah.
You know,
Yep.
it's not that we've arrested the, you know, the melting of snow on glaciers and the poles. That's all going forward, and we're not. We can't do enough to stop it.
But we can plant more
even
trees, get more
trees.
carbon in the ground.
Trees, trees, trees.
Stop building developments. Stop paving the world.
It's not just trees though, because
Yeah.
when you grow a forest, then a forest fire comes through and all that carbon's back in the atmosphere.
That's true.
When you grow a prairie and you have a fire, there's only a small percentage of your carbon that's back in the atmosphere, and the rest was built into the soil.
Well, and
Yeah.
indeed, they know now that there's loads of char every time there's a fire out in the prairies because it
Oh, yeah.
happens so fast. The grass falls over, it gets layered. The animals, life
Yeah.
comes up and gets it and takes it down.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah.
But if we do plant more trees, you know, the climate seems to be a little wetter around the trees. I mean, it holds more water, you know, potential that there's less fire, but there's more fuel, so
Well,
who
more
knows?
trees, but I couldn't agree more. Basically, that's why we cannot say we need to veganize the world because we need that animal interaction. We need
We
those
certainly
grasslands.
do.
You know.
Yeah, and the animals that graze it are a lot cheaper than lawnmowers.
Yep. Yep. Well, and I don't know.
They're more pleasant to be around, usually.
They work harder for less pay.
It's true. They're beneficial.
There's an article in the Guardian, and this one was talking about the fact that they have at the Rowlett Institute in England seen that feeding young sheep a variety of plants, one of which might have been one of the clovers, all of which are high in fumarin or something like that, basically means way less methane. Basically, they make so much methane because we decide that
Because of the how
Just the
much
diet.
protein we're feeding to, yeah. So
they
so
have
you get
access to what
farts
they
out
need
of
to
dairy cows, but those range cattle out there on the cattle station aren't farting at all. And think of the absurdity of charging a carbon tax for their methane emissions when you had to catch that carbon to get it into their rumen before they ever did any farting with it. You know, there wasn't any methane until you caught the carbon in the first place. So you're going to charge them a tax for emitting a little methane because they caught a lot of carbon? Wait a minute, there's something wrong with that.
Right. Well, so we
Yeah, anyway.
let's look at the tomatoes here and see what you think. These are all the most blight-resistant varieties.
And this is like a Roma or?
Yeah, we basically grow, that's probably Mountain Magic. Maybe not, that was a little big for Mountain Magic. We grow like Mountain Magic. They're all like the Mountain Horticultural Research Station's most late blight resistant. Because we're in the mountains, we have like nights below 60 a lot. So we are like the late blight center, you know.
Okay.
Late blight just devastates all the tomatoes. Most farmers don't even want to grow outdoors anymore. And we only grow these ones outdoors because late blight is such a fight.
Yeah, but do your horsetail soil drench.
Okay.
And do it like this. Always put a oak bark component in that because the oak bark preparation sequesters nitrates.
Okay. Let's
What
do that. Do you have
happens-
oak bark? Order it.
Yeah, it's so important when it comes to
Well, let's order it
nitrate
today.
control.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Nitrate control, see what's happening, you're putting this oak bark material in an animal skull and then immersing it in a wintertime or wet weather spring. Well, that water that's coming from the breakdown of the previous summer's vegetation is making that autumn and winter seepage nitrate rich. So in looking at what the oak bark is doing, see, here's this tree. Now it's got a really good silica activity in it because it's got good straight grain and it splits easy. So it's a real good sign of its silica activity. So it's carrying calcium because it has such a strong transport system. Well, the calcium wants to go on the horizontal, whereas the silica is on the vertical. So this is a plant that makes in its wood, it makes these horizontal checks, which are calcium deposits. I analyzed them in the lab. So it's got these real rich calcium deposits in the wood, but even more so, it pushes the calcium into its bark. And the bark is something like 70% calcium. It's really rich in calcium.
Is that any oak or just specific ones, white oak or?
Well, some oaks are better than others. And your English oak, which is the one that Steiner preferred, is actually a squattier tree than our white oaks. Our white oaks growing in these forests, they had to grow tall or they were going to be smothered by all the other trees. So they're big, tall, straight trees. But the English oak is much more of a bush. Makes great ships, you know, all of those oak, you know, beams. It makes a great shipbuilding material. And the British Navy planted lots of them in Australia and everywhere else they went. So it's better, I think, than the white oaks. But white oaks are really good, and red oaks too.
Yeah.
One of the best 505s I ever made was with a red oak. So, but the bark has lost its nitrogen. Any nitrogen that was in it when it was live bark has leached out in the weathering process. So you're only taking, to make this preparation, the outermost bark, the most nitrogen deficient, but it still has all those characteristics of calcium that tap into the nitrogen chemistry. So you put that, here it is inside the animal skull, and here's this nitrate-y leachate that's going through it, and it grabs onto the nitrogen and ties it back up as an amino acid. And boy, you need that activity in gardening a real lot. So I would take and just I'd do up some oak bark homeopathically and figure it out. It might be an ounce or whatever that you put in your spray, but put in homeopathic D6 or whatever. And incidentally, when you're making larger quantities of a homeopathic, you can hang a sling from a hook and put a 10-gallon jug or a 5-gallon jug and potentize like that. Vigorous plant over here beside the hay bale.
That is, yeah, it has these little cups.
It catches it on its own water,
Yeah, and yet there's not enough to breed mosquitoes, you know. It blooms from now until September, right? You can eat the young greens. They're a little bitter, but they're pot green. It's a medicinal. There's a latex that's good for all kinds of stomach problems, nausea and stuff. And there's some aspect, which I haven't researched because I don't need it, that women use for either starting or stopping menstrual flow. It's really excellent, highly palatable forage for animals, about 20-some% protein. You know, and it can
So
totally...
cows eat it, horses eat it?
Yep, yeah. And it loves wet areas. It can be submerged for up to 15 days. So this guy, I'm moving all these down to the bottom of the garden, you know, because it likes the wetlands, you know.
I've never seen it before.
Well, I can send you home with the plant.
There's some over there.
Now, I will tell you, it does want to spread around, but what good plant doesn't, right?
Comfrey?
Yeah, comfrey spreads around if you're not careful. You get somebody to go there with a tiller.
Yeah, well, I did. I spread mine around. I had planted it in a semi-wooded area, which I later cleared, and I plowed it, and my chisel plows dragged it all the way across the field.
Yep.
And I had comfrey all over. Boy, did I have comfrey, which I choked it out with corn and soybeans.
My story at Comfrey is Guy Herb Farm sells huge amounts of all their herbs, and their comfrey patch was 1/4 the size of this little garden here at the most. And they would dig all they needed every year let it regrow, and they would sell it 2 more times to other people. You know, it was just nonstop. You cannot get. I mean, it just.
I had a comfrey plant that I dropped a comfrey plant alongside the driveway, and it came up. And I dug it up and gave it to somebody, and it grew from the roots that were left. And I dug that up and gave it to somebody, and it grew from those roots. And I'm pretty sure it's still there, although I sold that farm.
I doubt that it's gone.
I doubt that it's gone too.
Yeah,
I
they'd
think
have to lay a piece of carpet over it or something, you know.
Or smother it with corn and soybeans.
Right. Yeah.
You got bindweed here too.
Yeah, we do.
Wow.
Yeah. Yep.
And
It's one of my
burdock. Oh boy.
Burdock I love. I have no problem with burdock at all.
Burdock is a boron collecting plant.
So
It
could
collects the
you
boron.
then make compost with lots of burdock and get the boron to plants that way?
You probably could. Yeah,
That'd
I
be
haven't
fun to
done
play
that,
with.
but I would definitely, if I put burdock in the compost without its seeds, then I'd probably get a boron effect from it.
I want to play with that.
This has got to be a hell of a boron plant.
Sure looks like it, doesn't it?
Oh man, it couldn't be that erect and juicy and all of those things. It's got to be transpiring a lot of water.
Well, I would love to give you a plant or two. I'd love for you to be able to see that all of its good functions, you know.
Yeah, there's some other.
There's a little one, good one.
Well, we got some in pots.
Oh, do you?
That'll make it even easier.
Yeah, okay, well that'd be great.
Yeah, yeah.
Sure, I won't turn that down.
Yeah, actually, it's the only thing I offer to Seed Savers Exchange. Nobody's taken me up on it yet, but maybe someday somebody will get into it, you know.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sacred plant.
Yeah, well, for one tribe, it was their sacred plant, you know, and the American Indians used the heck out of it, you know. Now, the northeastern native plant people, even though it is a native, don't like it because it's really rambunctious, you know. In a wet area, it can become pretty dominant, you know. After about 15 years, it starts spreading by runners. We haven't gotten there yet. Yeah. I might be,
Be careful some of the things you recommend. I like kudzu. Kudzu is one of my all-time favorite plants.
It's a great plant. Yeah.
It's a master plant. What a plant.
Whoever recommended that?
Well, if I was reclaiming a desert, I would plant it in all the gullies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then when we had flash floods, it would catch all the
Water.
Yeah,
It makes a huge root system,
it would catch the mud. It would slow everything down, and it would fill up the gullies. And then after filling up the gullies and it's spreading across the landscape, it's growing where the water seeps are, because the water seeps are found down there in the bottoms of the gullies. So it would never run out of water, and besides which, it sends its roots to China.
Oh, it does. I tried to dig one up out of a hill. I stopped at 28 feet. I was about to go off the cliff.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
yeah, that's because we don't see it, but in the winter it does nothing but grow roots. It grows in the winter, but you don't see it.
And it's a nitrogen fixer, right?
Yeah, it definitely
Has nodules, right?
it can nodulate, but the real secret to legumes that makes them so important is they bring oxygen into the soil. The nitrogen's actually following the oxygen, because the oxygen opens up the calcium magnesium cation complex. And when that opens up, then nitrogen is destined to follow. And it'll find some way to get there. It doesn't matter which pathway it takes, it's going to find a way to get to the calcium magnesium complex.
So we need to take this little piece right here out and put it in our cover crop talks. When I'm trying to convince people to grow legumes, you know, my rap to them is that, like, you want the legume because it's gonna, you know, compete. I mean, if you put a legume in and there's lots of nitrogen, it's not going to bother to nodulate and fix the nitrogen. But if you have, you know, grains growing with it, then they're going to be using the nitrogen. Then it's going to make nitrogen. You know, and that's a good rap. But your rap is way more important than that. It's
Well,
about
see
getting
what
the oxygen
happens
in.
then.
Yeah.
Yeah, I plant that in my cornfield, but it's making sure that the calcium is in a biological form in the soil, and then the corn becomes a plant that feeds the nitrogen fixation the energy it needs. See, nitrogen fixation takes about 10 units of sugar for every amino acid that gets fixed. And corn makes far more sugar than soybeans. Far
about
more.
putting legumes between tomatoes?
Corn sweetener wouldn't be so cheap if corn wasn't a sugar-making plant.
So what about putting legumes between tomatoes to make sure they got the calcium available for their fruit?
It's nowhere near as dynamic a
Right.
polarity as corn is, because corn is way the opposite from the legume,
Right.
and tomato is not that much different. Tomato is a plant where potassium is the dominant cation, but it's still got the other cations, and it needs them. But to unlock a soil, and this is what kudzu will do, is it will grow out of limestone rock. It'll get its roots there in the fractures, and it'll just keep growing roots and eating limestone. And
It's a real pioneer.
yeah, it's a plant to get things going.
Yeah, and then if you used your animals to contain it, to graze it, then
You
it could,
look, you just let me know if you ever see a pasture that is in use and has animals grazing constantly in
Right,
it
that has kudzu.
that has any kudzu inside the pasture.
They'll eat it as soon as they find it, man. They'll just
Yeah,
keep
well,
eating
if
it,
it's
right?
growing up to the fence, then
Yeah.
the fence wires will be sagging, and the fence will be leaning outward,
yeah.
because cows, horses, they'll just lean into it and see if they can lick up another leaf. And they got talented tongues. Boy, that cow's tongue goes way out there.
Right, yeah. There's a farm up here in Polk County that saved their farm in the 30s by baling their kudzu.
That makes
Because of the
sense.
drought,
Yeah.
they just
God, that'd
baled
be
it.
awesome.
Yeah.
Can you imagine having that for a supplemental animal feed?
Well, and then-
Oh, 26% protein hay? Whoa.
a whole lot easier to grow than grass. You know?
This is where I would mulch my tomatoes with the legume hay rather than try to grow the legumes with the
Okay.
tomatoes.
So some alfalfa hay or something.
You'll get a better effect, I think.
Well, that's worth thinking about. Yeah.
You can take a field of lesbedeza and bale that. And it's a great legume hay.
Find ourselves a big
It's
fat-
just, it
big
gets
fat-
a little woody once it starts to bloom, you know.
What about Crotalaria? Would that be a good one to bale?
Yeah, well, we had a couple different kinds of Crotalaria where I worked in Australia. And you could see, I mean, it was a big, tall weed primarily, rattle pod. And it was an annual. I never, it was obvious that it helped, and it was obvious that it was a legume.
What I love about
But-
it is it's one of the summer legumes you can easily kill. Because they got that brittle stem and you roll over it and it dies.
Well,
Whereas most of some of
if
those
you were
legumes
rolling
don't
it
mind
down, yeah, it's rolling it down. That gives you some reason to grow it.
Yeah, that's my main thing that I like about it, you know. So let me show you that flower and give you a cup plant. Pretty impressive, isn't it?
Yeah,
Wow.
But that just tells me
I think it's getting more silica from the gravel.
Yeah, it's gone through and it's
And
tells me more rock dust
feasting
in the
on the
farm,
gravel.
You know? More rock dust, more horsetail. Yeah, totally.
yeah, I think you find the rock dust was a very important input.
There's a couple of them in there. You can divide
Okay.
that up into 3 or so.
Okay. Well, I got to make sure I get home with this.
Yeah, right. Maybe water it before we get water.
And what kind of blackberry is this?
Getting the name now. Jeremy just told me the name too. It's mighty tasty.
It's the
You're rooting it, propagating it?
This kind of just become the greenhouse pet.
Oh, okay. And this is what, purple aster?
Ironweed. Ironweed.
Ironweed. You call that
A
ironweed,
mountain
okay?
wetland plant, Eupatorium.
Butterflies love it.
Yeah, it's beautiful flower. Wow.
And it's the wetland areas is where not way wet, but kind of wet areas is where it grows. You know. But here, this looks like a good blackberry to try.
In other words, it grows on bottomland.
Yep, it sure does. Everybody just grazes on them here. That could have been a little riper. Maybe this is a little riper.
That's a thornless variety?
Yeah, it's pretty much thornless. Yeah. No, I've decided we're going to plant some up at our homestead. You know, been looking at this long enough. You know, it really is the pet. Like we got it trained up over the greenhouse, which we shouldn't do because it's blocking sunlight. But it's kind of like the greenhouse pet. You know.
Make good borders on some pastures.
That might be the prime one. Try that one.
Okay. The previous one was better.
Better.
Yeah, we need to get to Grandview while we can.